A waitress I had never met before that night. A woman who risked everything, her job, her safety, her life, to slip me a warning that I almost ignored. 3 words. That's all she gave me. Don't drink that. If I had ignored her, if I had laughed it off and raised that champagne glass to my lips like my husband was urging me to do, you wouldn't be reading this story. Someone else would be telling it. Probably my sister sobbing at my funeral, wondering why I died so suddenly on my 35th birthday. But I didn't drink it. And 5 minutes later, I discovered that the man I had loved for 12 years, the father of my 2 children, the person I had built my entire life around, had been planning my murder for 6 months. This is the story of my 35th birthday dinner, the night everything changed. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand something. I wasn't suspicious. I had no reason to be. My life, from the outside, and honestly from the inside too, looked absolutely perfect. My name is Rachel Mercer, and I married David Mercer when I was 23 years old. He was everything a young woman dreams about: charming, successful, attentive, and devastatingly handsome. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. When he looked at you, really looked at you, it was like the rest of the world faded away. We met at a charity gala. I was working as an assistant to one of the event coordinators, running around with a clipboard and a headset, trying to make sure everything ran smoothly. He was a guest, a wealthy financial advisor who had donated generously to the Children's Hospital Fund. I still remember the moment I first saw him. He was standing by the bar in a perfectly tailored navy suit, laughing at something his colleague had said. His laugh was genuine, warm. It made me smile without even knowing what was funny. Our eyes met across the room. It sounds cliched, I know, but that's exactly how it happened. He smiled at me, and something in my chest fluttered. I looked away quickly, embarrassed. I was nobody, just a girl with a clipboard earning minimum wage. Men like him didn't notice women like me. But he did. He found me later that night during a quiet moment when I was fixing a centerpiece that had tipped over. He handed me a glass of champagne, ironic, isn't it? And said, "You're the hardest working person in this room. You deserve a drink." I told him I couldn't drink on the job. He laughed and said, "Then how about coffee tomorrow when you're off the job?" That was the start of everything. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was a whirlwind romance: fancy dinners, surprise trips to Paris, flowers delivered to my office every Friday. He treated me like a queen. He made me feel special, cherished, adored. My friends were jealous. My mother cried happy tears at our wedding. My father, who had always been skeptical of smooth talkers, eventually came around when he saw how happy I was. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. I quit my job to focus on our family when our first child, Emma, was born. Then came Lucas 2 years later. Life was full. Life was good. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of what I thought was happiness. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. I can see the moments when his mask slipped just a little, the times when his charm felt rehearsed, his affection performative, the way he would look at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't watching, a cold, calculating look that lasted only a fraction of a second before his warm smile returned. But at the time, I was blind. I was in love. I trusted him with my life, which is exactly what he was counting on. My 35th birthday dinner fell on a Saturday that year. David had been planning something for weeks, I could tell, by the way he would suddenly stop talking when I walked in the room, the secretive phone calls, the knowing smiles. "It's a surprise. You're going to love it." The kids were staying with my mother for the night. David told me to wear something special. When I came downstairs in my new red dress, the one he had bought me for Valentine's Day, his eyes lit up. "You look stunning," he said, kissing my cheek. "Absolutely stunning." He drove us to La Maison d'Or, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city, the kind of place with a 3-month waiting list and prices that would make your eyes water. I had always wanted to eat there, but could never justify the expense. "David," I gasped as we pulled up to the valet. "This is too much." "Nothing is too much for you," he said, squeezing my hand. "You're my everything, Rachel. I want tonight to be perfect." Those words, I replay them in my mind constantly. You're my everything. He said it with such conviction, such tenderness. Even now, knowing what I know, I almost believe he meant it. The maitre d' greeted us by name and led us to a private table in the back, decorated with candles and rose petals. A bottle of champagne was already chilling in an ice bucket beside the table. "I took the liberty of ordering ahead," David explained as we sat down. "The chef is preparing a special tasting menu just for you." I felt like a princess. No, more than that. I felt loved. After 12 years, after the sleepless nights with newborns and the arguments about money and the mundane routines of daily life, my husband was still trying to make me feel special. Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "This is incredible." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I have something else planned for later tonight, something big, but first, let's enjoy this." The first few courses were exquisite. A delicate amuse-bouche of foie gras on toasted brioche, a creamy lobster bisque that melted on my tongue, a perfectly seared scallop with truffle foam. Each dish was a masterpiece. Between courses, we talked and laughed like we hadn't in years. David told jokes. He reminisced about our first date, our wedding day, the births of our children. He was charming, attentive, everything I fell in love with. I should have noticed that he kept checking his watch. I should have noticed that he seemed almost nervous, impatient even, like he was waiting for something. But I was too happy to notice, too caught up in the romance of it all. It was between the 4th and 5th course that everything changed. The waitress who had been serving us all evening, a pretty young woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, approached our table with the champagne bottle. She had been attentive but quiet throughout the meal, efficient in that way that good servers are, present without being intrusive. "Time for a toast," David announced, gesturing for her to pour. "The champagne has been breathing long enough." The waitress nodded and began to pour the champagne into our flutes. But as she poured mine, something strange happened. Her hand trembled, just slightly, just for a moment, and she looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Warning? Desperation? I frowned, confused. She quickly looked away and finished pouring, placing the bottle back in the ice bucket. "Actually," David said, his voice overly casual, "would you mind bringing us a fresh bottle? This one has been open for a while." "Of course, sir," the waitress said. But she didn't leave immediately. She hesitated, her eyes darting between David and me. "Is everything all right?" I asked her. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. "Yes, ma'am. Excuse me." She turned and walked away. I thought nothing of it. David raised his glass. "To you, my beautiful wife, to 35 years of being the most amazing woman I've ever known, and to many more years together." I smiled and reached for my glass. That's when it happened. The waitress reappeared at my side, seemingly out of nowhere. She was holding a napkin which she placed beside my plate, but as she leaned in, her lips barely moving, she whispered 3 words that changed my life. "Don't drink that." Then she was gone, disappearing toward the kitchen before I could react. I sat frozen, my hand hovering over the champagne flute. My heart was suddenly pounding. Don't drink that. What did she mean? Was she crazy? Was this some kind of joke? David was watching me expectantly, his glass raised. "Rachel, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I heard myself say. I thought I heard something." "Come on, drink up," he urged, gesturing with his glass. "The champagne is perfect. It's Dom Perignon, your favorite." I looked at the golden liquid in my glass. Tiny bubbles rose to the surface, dancing in the candlelight. It looked perfectly normal. It smelled perfectly normal. "Don't drink that." "I'm sorry," I said slowly, lowering my hand. "I'm actually not feeling very well all of a sudden. Maybe I should wait before having any more alcohol." David's expression flickered. Just for a second, a flash of something dark behind his eyes. Annoyance? Frustration? But it was gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "Are you sure?" he pressed. "It's your birthday. One toast won't hurt." "I'm sure. I think the richness of the food is getting to me." I placed my hand on my stomach for effect. "I'll be fine in a few minutes." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, darling, whatever you want." He set his own glass down without drinking from it. That's when I knew. In that moment, with absolute crystalline clarity, I knew that something was very, very wrong. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, my legs shaky beneath me. I needed to think. I needed to process what was happening. In the marble-tiled restroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide with fear. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. The waitress was probably some mentally unstable person playing a prank. My husband loved me. He would never hurt me. But even as I thought the words, I didn't believe them. The bathroom door opened, and I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was the waitress. She quickly checked that we were alone, locking the door behind her with trembling hands. Up close, I could see that she was younger than I thought, maybe 25 at most. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "Ma'am, please, you need to listen to me. I don't have much time." "Who are you? What do you know?" "My name is Sophie. I've been working here for 3 months. Last week, a man came to the restaurant. He asked specifically for me because I was new, because I needed money. He offered me $50,000 to do something for him." My blood ran cold. "What did he want me to do?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "He gave me a vial. He told me to pour it into your champagne glass during dinner. He said it was just something to make you sleepy, that it was a surprise for his wife, something romantic." I felt my knees buckle. I gripped the counter for support. "But I looked him up," Sophie continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "After he left, something felt wrong. I searched his name online and I found articles about his first wife. She died 6 years before you married him. They said it was an accident, but—" "What?" I whispered. "David was married before? He never told me." "Her name was Caroline Mercer. She drowned in the bathtub. The official ruling was accidental, but there were investigations, questions that never got answered." Sophie grabbed my hands, her grip desperate. "Ma'am, please, that man is not who you think he is. I don't know what was in that vial, but it wasn't anything romantic. I'm so sorry I even considered it, but when I saw you, when I saw how happy you looked, I couldn't do it." The room was spinning. My entire life, everything I thought I knew, was crumbling around me. "The champagne, you poured it." "I poured the contaminated glass to him by mistake at first. Then I switched them while resetting the table. The glass in front of you is the one with the substance. I tried to warn you without him seeing. I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have—" "Where is the vial now?" I interrupted. "Hidden in my locker. I kept it because I knew something was wrong. It's evidence." Evidence. The word cut through my panic like a blade. Evidence. "Call the police," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Call them right now. Tell them everything. I'll keep him distracted." Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "What are you going to do?" I looked at myself in the mirror again. The scared woman staring back at me took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders. She became someone new. I'm going to find out the truth. I returned to the table with a smile on my face. David looked up from his phone, his expression carefully neutral. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much better," I said, sliding into my seat. "I'm sorry about before. I don't know what came over me." "That's all right, darling." He gestured to my champagne glass, still sitting untouched where I had left it. "Ready for that toast now?" I looked at the glass, at the poison hidden in those beautiful sparkling bubbles, at the death my husband had planned for me. "Actually," I said slowly, "I've been thinking. I want to play a game." David raised an eyebrow. "A game?" "Yes, in honor of my birthday. A truth game. We ask each other questions and we have to answer honestly. No lies, no evasions, just truth." He chuckled, but there was tension in his jaw. "That sounds interesting. What kind of questions?" "Let's start simple." I leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. "Tell me about your life before we met. Your 20s. What were you like?" "You know all of this already," he said dismissively. "I was in business school, then I started my career." "Were you ever married before me?" The question hung in the air between us. David's face went very still. "Where is this coming from?" he asked carefully. "It's a simple question, David. Were you ever married before me? Yes or no?" Silence stretched between us. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of how much I might know, what I might have discovered. Finally, he sighed. "Yes, I was married once before. It didn't last long. She passed away." "How did she die?" "Rachel, this isn't—" "How did she die, David?" His mask was slipping now. The charming husband I'd known for 12 years was fading and something else was emerging, something cold, something dangerous. "It was an accident," he said, his voice flat. "She drowned in the bathtub. She had been drinking. It was ruled an accident by the police, by the coroner, by everyone. I don't know why you're bringing this up now." "Why did you never tell me?" "Because it was painful." He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Then, catching himself, he lowered his voice. "Because it was the worst time of my life. Because I wanted to start fresh with you. Is that hard to understand?" I sat back, studying him, the man I had loved, the father of my children, the monster hiding in plain sight. "Tell me about the life insurance policy," I said quietly. David went pale. "What?" "The life insurance policy, the one you took out on me 3 months ago, the one worth $5 million. I found the documents in your office last month while looking for our tax records. I didn't say anything because I thought maybe it was a mistake or you'd forgotten to mention it. But now I'm wondering." "Rachel, you're being paranoid." "Am I? Or am I finally seeing clearly for the first time in 12 years? Before he could respond, the restaurant's front door burst open. 2 police officers entered, followed by Sophie, who pointed directly at our table. "That's him. That's the man who paid me to poison my wife." The next few hours were a blur. David was detained for questioning. The champagne glass was taken as evidence, along with the vial Sophie had hidden. A preliminary test revealed the presence of potassium cyanide, a lethal poison that would have caused cardiac arrest within minutes of consumption. My husband had tried to kill me on my 35th birthday, in a fancy restaurant, with champagne. He wanted to watch me die while he sat across from me and pretended to mourn. The police investigation uncovered things that made my skin crawl.
David had been meticulously planning this for months. He had researched poisons online, using a VPN to hide his searches, had carefully cultivated a relationship with Sophie. He'd actually approached 3 other servers before finding one desperate enough to consider his offer, and had set up the life insurance policy with a waiting period that ended just days before my birthday. But that wasn't the worst part. The investigators reopened the case of his first wife, Caroline. With modern forensic techniques and new testimony from witnesses who had been too afraid to speak at the time, they discovered evidence of foul play. Caroline hadn't drowned accidentally. She had been held underwater until she stopped breathing. David had killed before, and he would have killed again. The trial was a sensation. National media covered every moment of it. The charming businessman, the devoted husband and father, revealed to be a cold-blooded serial killer who murdered women for money. It turned out David had massive debts I never knew about. His business was failing, he had made terrible investments, and was on the verge of bankruptcy. My life insurance payout would have saved him, would have let him start over, would have given him the freedom to find his next victim. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder for Caroline and attempted first-degree murder for me, David looked at me across the courtroom. His mask was completely gone now. What stared back at me was empty, soulless, utterly devoid of humanity. "I would have gotten away with it," he said as they led him away. "If that stupid waitress had just done what she was paid to do, I would have gotten away with it." Those were the last words my husband ever spoke to me. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Explaining to Emma and Lucas that their father was going to prison, that he had tried to hurt Mommy, nearly broke me. Emma was 9, old enough to understand the basics, but too young to process the betrayal. Lucas was 7, confused and heartbroken, asking every night when Daddy was coming home. I didn't have the answers they needed. I barely had the strength to get out of bed each morning. But for them, I had to keep going. For them, I had to be strong. Therapy helped. Group sessions with other survivors of domestic violence and attempted murder, women who understood what it was like to love someone who wanted you dead. I learned that I wasn't alone. I learned that the signs I had missed weren't obvious, that skilled manipulators like David knew exactly how to hide their true nature. I learned to forgive myself for trusting him. Sophie and I stayed in touch. She quit the restaurant and used the reward money from the police. There had been a standing reward for information leading to the capture of Caroline's killer, to go back to school. She's studying criminal justice now. She wants to help other people the way she helped me. I tell her all the time that she's my guardian angel, that she saved my life. She always shakes her head and says she was just doing what anyone would do. But she's wrong. Not everyone would have risked their job, their safety, their future for a stranger. Not everyone would have listened to their conscience when $50,000 was being offered to look the other way. Sophie is extraordinary, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that she walked into that restaurant on that particular night.
It's been 3 years since that birthday dinner. I'm 38 now. Emma is 12, Lucas is 10. We've built a new life together, a smaller house, a simpler existence, but one filled with love and honesty. I've learned so much from this experience, things I wish I didn't have to learn, but things I need to share with others. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I ignored red flags for years because I didn't want to see them. I made excuses for David's behavior, rationalized his coldness, convinced myself that no one is perfect. But deep down, in a place I refused to acknowledge, I knew something was off. Second, financial independence matters. When I quit my job to raise our children, I gave David complete control over our finances. I didn't know about his debts, his failed investments, his life insurance policies.
I was completely in the dark about my own life. Never again. Know your financial situation, have your own accounts, be a partner in your finances, not a bystander. Third, people can hide who they really are. David fooled everyone, his colleagues, his friends, his family, me. He was a master of manipulation, a chameleon who could become whatever you needed him to be. Don't assume you know someone just because you've been with them for years. Pay attention to patterns, to moments when their mask slips, to the way they treat people who can't benefit them. Fourth, sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places. A stranger saved my life that night. A 25-year-old waitress I had never met chose conscience over money, compassion over compliance. Never underestimate the impact you can have on someone else's life. Never underestimate the impact a stranger can have on yours. And finally, survival is just the beginning. Living through something terrible doesn't mean you've healed from it. Healing takes time, effort, support. It takes therapy and tears and setbacks and small victories. It takes learning to trust again, learning to love again, learning that one person's evil doesn't define your worth. I am more than what happened to me. I am more than David's victim. I am a survivor, a mother, a woman who stared death in the face and refused to look away. Last month was my 38th birthday. Emma and Lucas made me breakfast in bed, burnt toast and runny eggs, the most delicious meal I've ever eaten. We spent the day at the beach building sandcastles and splashing in the waves, laughing until our stomachs hurt. In the evening, we had dinner at home. No fancy restaurants, no champagne, just pizza and ice cream cake, exactly what I asked for. Sophie came over along with my mother and my sister. We told stories and played games and celebrated simply being alive. When I blew out the candles, I didn't wish for wealth or fame or romance. I wished for exactly what I had in that moment: my children's laughter, my family's love, my freedom. Before bed, Emma came into my room. She's at that age where she's starting to understand the world, its darkness as well as its light. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with those serious eyes that remind me so much of my own. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if that waitress hadn't warned you?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling her warm weight against me. "Sometimes," I admitted, but then I remember that she did warn me, that I listened, that I'm here, and I try to focus on that instead. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me with a wisdom beyond her years. "I'm going to be like her when I grow up," she said. "I'm going to help people. I'm going to be the person who speaks up when something's wrong." Tears filled my eyes. "That's the best birthday present you could ever give me." She hugged me tight, and I held her like I would never let go. Because I wouldn't. Because she was my miracle, my reason for surviving, my proof that good could come from evil. My 35th birthday dinner was supposed to be the end of my story. Instead, it became the beginning of a new one, a story of survival, of justice, of healing, a story I never wanted to live, but am grateful to tell. Because every day I wake up is a gift. Every breath I take is a victory. Every moment with my children is a reminder that I am still here, still fighting, still alive. And to the woman reading this who might be in a relationship that feels wrong, who might be ignoring red flags because she doesn't want to see them, who might be convincing herself that she's being paranoid, trust yourself. Get out. Ask for help. You deserve to live. You deserve to thrive. You deserve a birthday dinner where the only surprise is how much you're loved. Don't wait for a waitress to save you. Save yourself. I share this story not for pity, but for purpose. If even one person reads this and recognizes something familiar, a too charming partner, a financial situation kept hidden, a feeling of wrongness they can't quite name, then this story has done its job. Sophie visits every few months. We sit on my porch with cups of tea and watch the sunset. Sometimes we talk about that night. Sometimes we don't. Either way, there's a bond between us that will never break. The bond between a woman who chose to do the right thing and a woman whose life was saved because of it. David will spend the rest of his life in prison. He wrote me a letter once, shortly after his conviction. I burned it without reading it. Whatever he has to say, I don't need to hear. His words have no power over me anymore. My children are growing up strong and brave and kind. Emma wants to be a lawyer. Lucas wants to be a firefighter. Both of them want to help people, to make the world a little bit safer, a little bit better. That's David's legacy, twisted and transformed into something beautiful. His evil created goodness in its wake. His darkness taught my children the value of light. And me? I'm still learning to trust, still learning to love, still building a life that is entirely my own. Every birthday now is a celebration, not just of another year older, but of another year alive. Because I almost wasn't. Because a waitress said 3 words. Because I listened. Don't drink that. The 3 words that saved my life.